Welcome everyone. My name is Tim Burris, and today I want to talk about using Microsoft Report Builder to generate PDFs from your .NET code without hooking up to SSRS, without using direct to SQL, just using plain old CLR objects. So what is Report Builder or Microsoft Report Builder? As they say right here, Report Builder is a standalone report authoring environment. But then they go on to say that you use it to publish to reporting services or SharePoint integrated mode. When you look around the web, when you find YouTube videos or other training material on using Microsoft Report Builder, every single one that I find shows you only two ways of using it. Either hooking it up to a cloud service or SSRS, or hooking directly to SQL Server. But what if you just want to use it from C# to generate your PDF? There is a completely supported way to do it, and it's super simple. So let's just jump right into it. I've opened Microsoft Report Builder and started with a blank report. When you start with a blank report, you're going to get just what you see here, an empty title, execution time in the footer, and then we just start building from there. So I'm going to build a purchase order report. I'll start by giving this a title. I'll call it purchase order. And if you think about a purchase order report, you're going to have one purchase order, a parent record, and then underneath that you're going to have a bunch of line items. The next thing we need to do then is define what our data is going to look like for this report. We start with data source. Each Microsoft report needs a data source, so I'll start with creating a new data source. I'm just going to call this, I'll call this POCO data. POCO data source. It really, the name here really does not matter. It's not going to be used anywhere except for, I guess let's say it's not going to be used anywhere. It's going to be used when we create a data set and associate it, but we're going to create this POCO data source. We're not going to use a shared connection. We're just going to say that the air quote connection is embedded in my report. And this is where all the videos that you might have seen, or all the documentation, is going to show you how you can connect a SQL Data Warehouse, SQL Server, SharePoint, all that great stuff. But if you just want to give it the data yourself from C#VB.NET, then what you're going to select is enter data. And you don't need a connection string. And all this is saying is, I'm going to provide you the data whenever I go to generate the report. So we have our data source. We've set the connection type to enter data. So we'll press OK. So now we have a data source. Next thing is that we need to create our data sets. These will be the fields that we're actually going to use in our report. We'll start with the parent record, which would be a purchase order. I'm going to go ahead and name this purchase order. I don't think I can put spaces. I don't think I should put spaces. Probably can, but not a good idea. And again, instead of shared data set, I'm going to say that this is going to be embedded within my report. Because again, we're not using any cloud services. We're not using SQL Server. Everything is going to be inside this report. Once I do that, it says, well, what's the data source going to be? And this is where we see our POCO data source. This is the only time that name POCO data source, or whatever you call your data source, will come into play, which is why it's not important what you name it. I choose POCO data source, and then I don't need to do a query designer or anything like that, because we're not going to be connecting to SQL Server. There's no T-SQL to run. We're going to manually create the fields. So the next thing that we need to do is we'll go to the fields, and we'll start creating what fields are available for our purchase order. And each time we'll do add query field. I'll do purchase order number. And that's the name, and then the source will be the same. And we'll do customer name. Really, it's probably vendor name, but we'll go with customer name. Okay, so we're just going to put two fields on here. And then that'll be our parent record. Now it's a data set. There's only going to be one record in it, but it's still a data set, even though we're only going to populate it with one. However, our line items, which we're going to go ahead and create now, and again we'll use shared, and we'll just do line items. I probably would call this purchase order line items to be explicit, but I'm just going to call line item. I'm just going to call it line item. Again, it's going to go into our POCO. Again, we need nothing. We don't need anything for Query Designer. We can just start adding our fields. If you're already thinking this is going to take forever, I've got 75 million fields that I need to add. I don't want to add them all by hand. Yes, if you're using direct to SQL, you can auto-populate it. There are some techniques you can use to add these fields in. One way that I like to use is just editing the report itself. We'll look at that in just a moment. But this RDL file, this report that's going to be created by Microsoft Report Builder is just an XML file. You can open it and you could easily generate the XML elements that define these fields and drop them in there. So we'll talk about that in just a few. So right now I'm looking at a line item, and so one of the fields on the line item is going to be the amount. And we're not going to create too much stuff here. We're just going to move on. We'll say the amount, and how about the material? Material. All right, 2 fields on each. Done. Okay, so we have our purchase order and we have our line item. Both of them are data sets. In our report, we're going to want our purchase order kind of header information to be up here, and then we're going to want a list of line items down here. And like I said before, the purchase order data set is a collection. Even though we're only going to be giving it one purchase order, we still it's still a collection. There's a few ways you could do this. You could just drag this guy on here, and then it's just going to show. It will just take the first purchase order that it finds. Purchase order number, I should say. It would just take the first one, and that'll work just fine. What I don't like about it is you drag all these fields on here, and you're just going to see expression everywhere. So it can be kind of difficult to understand. So what I prefer to do is to just go ahead and insert a list. Even though I know that there's only going to be one item in this list, I still go ahead and create a list, and that way, whenever I drop these purchase order fields on here, they'll show their actual name. So I'll make this guy a little bit bigger. And I'm probably getting a little too far into the weeds of actually using Report Builder. There are a bunch of great videos about actually using Report Builder. Just ignore all the stuff about tying it to SQL Server or SSRS. So with that said, I'm gonna move on a little more quickly here. Shrink this guy up. Next thing is we need a list of line items. So we'll create a table. We'll say it's going to be slightly indented from our header information, and we will bring our amount field right there, and we'll take our material field right there. And we don't need this third column, so we can delete it. If we had more than 3, then we could just insert column and just keep dragging and dropping all of ours in there. But we're going to go with that. And down here in the footer, we're just going to, we already have execution time. Let's insert a page number field. So here in the built-in fields, this is one of the things I like about using Report Builder, is you're going to get some of this stuff out of the box. And you'll have headers and footers. You can control how they get repeated. So we'll go with overall page number and total number of pages, just like that. Okay, so we have created our report. I'm just going to save it. And now we're going to jump over to C# and show, using this RDL, how we can generate the PDF from code behind so that you could send it to blob storage or email it or whatever you want to make it available for download. Whatever it is, we can just do that from C#. So here I have an ASP.NET Core application. This is simply the right out of the box brand new .NET Core application. If we run it, then we'll just get our welcome page. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add a link to a report on this page, and that link will just go to a controller which will do all the work of generating our PDF. So we'll go to our index, we'll go ahead and add an anchor href. We're going to just say it's going to be report, so that'll be the controller. We'll go ahead and make it open in a new tab, and we'll call this purchase order report. So we have our link. We'll be able to click that and go to our controller. Let's go ahead and drop a controller in here real quick. Create a new controller. Empty. We'll just call it report controller. And instead of wiring up anything, we're just going to use attribute routing, which actually I kind of prefer anyway. So we'll say that the route is the controller, and we'll leave it at index. And one thing I forgot to mention, the only change that I made to this template was I created this reports folder, and that report RDL that we were just editing, I already put it right here. So the report builder, when I opened it, I opened this RDL. So if we open this guy up in Visual Studio, you'll see what I mean about this just being XML. And we can see our data sets here. So we can see our purchase order data set, and we can see our line item data set. So as I was mentioning, if you had a bunch of fields that you didn't want to create, I'm sure that you guys have some clever ways that you could build these elements. Maybe there are columns in a database, and you build a dynamic select statement that returns, this XML, and then you can just drop and paste it in here. Or maybe you have a T4 script, or whatever you have. I'm sure you have great ways that you could just generate this very simple XML, so you could populate all of your fields right here. In fact, you could probably create a T4 that, or use the Roslyn generator and generate the XML from your POCO class. In fact, maybe someone else out there already has that. However, I doubt it, because like I said before, I can't find anyone who's just using POCOs to generate these reports. But that's the report, and that's the one we're going to be rendering. So we've created our controller here. Since this is a Microsoft .NET Core application, we are going to have to use a Nuget package that is not actually supported by Microsoft. So they support Microsoft Report Builder. They have the reporting tools for the .NET framework, but they don't have it for .NET Core, which is quite unfortunate. However, I've been using this for a little while, and it works pretty great. So we will start by going and getting our Nuget package. And we'll look for ReportViewer Core, .NET Core. So it's this guy right here. We can install this. It's on GitHub. You can go check it out. And this is going to give us the report builder classes that will allow us to execute that RDL. Again, for the Microsoft .NET Framework, you can install ReportViewer in your Microsoft .NET Framework project. Also, I'll note that this is called ReportViewer because they do have in the .NET Framework user interface controls that will let you show the report on the page. However, I don't know if that works in .NET Core, but for us, we're just going to use the engine part of it. We're just going to use the part that actually executes the RDL and accepts in the data. So we've installed that Nuget package, and now we're going to author the code that we need to run the report. So the way the code works is, first you just need to create what they call a local report. So we're gonna have report, trying to get used to the syntax that I prefer. So I'm gonna go with Microsoft instead of var. I'm gonna go with Microsoft Reporting, .NET Core, local report, report equals new. I actually prefer this over var, but it's taking me a little bit of time to get in the habit. So we have our report, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a using statement so I don't have to type this in each time, or uint, either way. Got my using in. So we have our local report, and the next thing you need to do for the report is you need to tell it to load the RDL, the report definition. So you say report.load report definition, and now we need to give it a stream to our report. So our RDL is in this folder right here. So we will create a file stream that just loads it. Obviously, you could have this coming from a database, wherever, however you got it. If you have a string, you could create a string reader and do it, but ours is going to come from this file. which means we're going to need to know what folder we're running in. So we are going to bring in the web host environment. This will tell us what folder we're running in. We'll go ahead and dependency injection that guy in. That'll let us go ahead and create, we'll go ahead and get the path to the file. So we'll just create the file path, and we'll say that it's, we'll see if we can spell that, path.join web, and it'll be the content root. That's where that file will be copied when we compile, and it'll be in the reports folder, and the name of it is report alpha.rdo. So that's the path to where our report is. We'll go ahead and open up a stream, file stream. It'll be a new file stream. I'm definitely enjoying this new Visual Studio 2022. I forget what they call it. It's not IntelliSense, but this pretty amazing. It looks at what you're doing, and you can see how it's already predicted what I should do. So I'm just gonna, it knows that I probably want a file stream with my file path variable, and that it's gonna be open read. That's pretty amazing. I'm just gonna tab and say, yeah man, that's exactly what I wanted. And so now we have our file stream, even though we misspelled it. Kind of a signature of mine is typoing. Now that we have our file stream, when we go to load our report definition, that's what we'll use. After loading the report definition, the next steps are to populate the data sources. So we will need to go to data sources, and we will add a new data source. The first one will be our purchase order data set. Purchase order. And we're going to need to supply some data for that. So I'm just going to leave that blank for right now. And then we know we need the exact same thing for line item. Now, if you remember from when we were just doing our reports, these names must correspond directly to what we name these data sets here. So we have purchase order, and we have line item. And that's what we're doing right now, is we are going to be supplying the report with the data for each of those two data sets. And again, I'm going to come back and fill those guys in with data in just a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and finish out the code that we would need to render this report. So after we've supplied it with our data, we would call report.render, and then we would tell it, well, what format do we want to render, and a bunch of other information if you optionally want to include it. We're just going to go with format. It is documented, well documented by Microsoft ReportViewer what these formats available are. Things like Excel, PDF, image. Caution about Excel. Yes, it will technically produce an Excel document, but these reports are not Excel friendly. What you're going to get is really crazy merge cells and things. What you will not get is a beautifully created Excel document that you can use to edit. It'll look fine, but if you plan on doing adjustments to that Excel document, this is not the way you want to go. But if you want to create a PDF, fantastic. So when we call report render PDF, it'll return us a byte array. So that'll be our PDF data. And then for this view, once we get it back, we're just going to go ahead and return it. Now, at this point, we have our PDF byte array. We could send it to maybe Azure Blob Storage, or send it via email, or whatever we want to do. For this particular demonstration, we are just going to return a file that is going to be the PDF data, and then the content type will be application PDF. Of course, you know, while doing this, I'm following very poor practices of what I typically would do, which is if I'm passing in a string literal, I would typically name these parameters so that when I come back or someone else comes back and reads it later, they'll know exactly what we're talking about here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get consistency back here and say what these are. If I had variables that were named appropriately, that matched or somewhat matched those parameter names, I wouldn't feel a need to name the parameter. But whenever it's some kind of literal or it's different completely than what's going in, I definitely like to name my parameters. And we'll get rid of this view. So there we have it in terms of what we need to do to render the report. Next up is we just need to create some POCOs for these items. So I'm going to just create them right here in this in this controller. Obviously not what you would expect to do in your application, but we'll create our purchase order. And I think that we had purchase order name, purchase order number. Let me take a quick look back. We had purchase order number and customer name, purchase order number and customer name. Okay, great. So we have our purchase order class, and the other one was line item. And on there, I believe we had an amount and material. Now I'm making amount a string, and that's because one of the things I love about using POCOs for building reports is I'm not going to write any code in the report. I'm not going to do any formatting in the report. I'm going to do all the real work inside of C#. So how I want to format amount should be done in here, because what if it's based on user settings? What if certain users don't want to see decimals or what have you? If you're doing it all here in C# in your POCOs, you can hook into any kind of user preference services you have, or maybe you have business logic that changes how things are computed. You can take advantage of all that in here. So these POCOs, they're going to be simple. My report is going to display them exactly as I fill them. So if I want amount to be formatted a certain way, then I'll do that in C# and all of my code will be in one place, instead of, oh, did I do that in the report, or did I do that in C#, or did I do that in the database? All right here in C#, I will fill these POCOs with exactly what I want them to show. Now that I have these classes, I actually just need to fill these data sets with actual data. We'll start with a purchase order. We will create we'll create a list of purchase order. Now, like I said before, I understand that there's only be one purchase order with a bunch of line items, but the report expects a collection. So we are going to create this collection, but we are just going to fill it with a single item. So we have our list, and we're just going to create one purchase order, and we'll put the customer name as Jack Sparrow. And what was the other? Purchase order number, and we'll go with Jenny. We'll let Jenny be the purchase order number. Okay. Next, so we have one purchase order. That means for our purchase order data source or data set, we will pass in that collection. Again, we'll only be using one, and then we'll just do the same thing for the line items. Boom, boom, and oops. And we will create two of these guys. We'll create two line items so that we can see what do we put? Okay, amount. Again, so if this were coming from the database, maybe this would be 53.59, and let's assume that was a property, and then we would toString and maybe say that it's simple. It's just going to be currency. Nothing special. Next up is the material, and maybe this is going to be steel tubing. And we'll create one more line item. Here we will make this amount 500, and the material will be stuff. That's what we need. All right, so now we have our line items data set. We will push that in here. Boom, done. So with that, we have instantiated a new local report. We have told it that we want it to load the RDL, which we defined up here. And we have sent in our two list of POCOs, which match the field names that were defined in the report. Then we've told it, I want you to just go ahead and go create a PDF, and then we're going to return that PDF. So here we go. Let's see if it works. Okay, we're on our home page. We have our very awesomely written link to report. Click it. Looks like it's doing something. At least we didn't get a 404, and it worked on the first time. That actually doesn't happen too often. So we have our header up there that we put in. We have our purchase order header information and our two line items, and we put our page number and total number of pages down here in a terrible format, and so 2 and 2. I wonder what I did that is causing me to get 2 pages because it's so short. So even though building this is not really part of what this video is, I am curious to know what I might have done. So let's look at the report properties. We're on portrait, we're on letter. Oh, that's quite a bit of margin. So if my left and right margins are 1 inch, that's 2 inches each. We're at 6. Oh, we're over 6.5. So that would put us at over 8.5, and that's the width of our page. So we've defined the width of our report here at looks like 6 3/4, maybe a little over. Actually, that might be almost 7. And then we have our margins set here. It's weird that the default page size would be that way, but we'll be okay. We'll move the margin down. We'll save this report, and then really all we should have to do is come back and refresh this guy, and hopefully we will. Yeah, we got 1 page. So using the RDL .NET Core, we can generate the report from code behind. We could send that wherever we wanted to go, and I believe that's about it. These reports are pretty amazing in terms of the designer. Report Builder has been around for a really long time, but Microsoft keeps improving it. They keep modernizing it and moving it forward. So even though it's been around forever, it's still a pretty nice tool. I mean, used to you could build these RDLs in Visual Studio. They were called RDLCs for client side. Microsoft has since seemed to abandon that designer. So they just have this standalone report builder, but it's still pretty. I think it's a pretty great way, even today. Again, there's a ton of great videos out there showing what you can do with these reports. But if your customer had a logo they wanted, you can insert images, and it's all supported through generating the report. So we'll just bring in an image. Let's cross our fingers here that we don't do anything crazy. Let's see. Wonder what this guy is. Looks like it's the front of my wife's store. Okay. Well, let's go with that. So we have that. We put that image in. We'll save it. We'll come back to our report, run it, and images show. So, provides a ton of functionality. You can run it from code behind to generate your PDF. You can handle headers and footers and page breaks, and all those things that can be difficult can all be handled in here. Again, the reason I wanted to show this video was not because I think that I can demonstrate how Report Builder works better than anyone else, because I absolutely can't. Like many developers, building reports is not my favorite thing to do in the world, but sometimes you have to get it done. The goal was to show that you don't have to hook it up to SSRS. You don't have to hook it up directly to your SQL Server database. You can just use C# objects. And by not hooking it directly to our database or directly to SSRS, we can deploy this project to a very lightweight Azure app service. We could hook it up to get data from an API or whatever. All the power is ours in how we want to fill the data, and deploying it means there's no other dependencies. We don't have to have any other services set up. As always, I truly appreciate all of your time. Have a wonderful day.